You say God feels distant. Your prayers hit the ceiling. Your worship feels hollow. You close your eyes and wait for the warmth you used to feel, but the silence grows heavier. And somewhere deep inside you whisper, God, where did you go? But what if he never left? What if the distance you feel isn't divine absence, but spiritual shallowness? Jonathan Edwards once wrote, God hides not because he has withdrawn, but because man will not descend. The problem is not that heaven has closed its doors, it's that your soul has stopped diving. We have built a generation of believers who want the feeling of nearness without the discipline of depth. We skim across the surface of devotion, scrolling, singing, surviving, while the Spirit waits in the depths where noise cannot follow. And when we no longer feel him, we assume he has moved. But God does not drift, hearts do. He remains as near as he has always been, unchanging, unwavering, holy. It is we who wander one distraction at a time, one compromise at a time, until his silence feels like abandonment. Psalm 42 verse 7 says, Deep calls to deep at the roar of your waterfalls. That means the Spirit within you is calling to something far below the surface. He is not asking for performance. He is pleading for proximity. He is not hiding to punish you. He is waiting to be pursued. The ocean of his presence has not receded. You have simply stopped swimming. When you first met him, every prayer felt alive. Every word burned. Every moment carried a pulse of heaven. But then came the comfort, the rhythm, the routine. And slowly, depth became effort, and effort became optional. Now your faith feels thin, stretched across the surface like oil on water. You talk about God more than you talk to him. You sing of surrender while still gripping the world. And when he no longer moves at your command, you think he has left. But friend, he never left. You simply never went deep enough to find where he's been all along. Edwards said, the believer's complaint is not that God hides, but that he does not seek with all his heart. The Spirit's silence is not rejection. It is refinement. He withholds what your flesh demands so that your faith might awaken. He stops responding to your surface prayers so that you will learn to pray from the soul. Because shallow faith will never carry eternal weight. And God loves you too much to let you stay on the surface where your roots can't hold when the storm comes. If you want to hear him again, stop talking long enough to listen. If you want to feel him again, stop chasing feelings and start chasing him. Go back to the quiet. Turn off the noise. Kneel without agenda. Wait until your heart aches, and then wait longer. The silence you hate is the threshold of intimacy. The emptiness you feel is not proof of distance. It's the Spirit emptying you of distractions so you can finally breathe underwater. He is not gone. He is deeper. He is not silent. He is waiting for you to descend beneath the noise. You don't need a new touch, you need a new depth. Because God doesn't respond to volume, he responds to surrender. He isn't hiding to frustrate you. He is calling you to follow him where comfort cannot survive. So before you blame his absence, ask yourself, have you gone deep enough to find where he dwells? Because God never left, you just never went deep. And in that truth lies both confrontation and comfort. He is still here, still holy, still waiting. Not far away, but far beneath. Now tell me in the comments below, what city and country are you watching from? Let's see how far the depths of God's call are reaching today. We live in a generation that confuses emotion with encounter. If the music swells, we call it presence. If we cry, we call it revival. If we feel nothing, we call it absence. But my friend, the Spirit of God does not depend on our sensations. He depends on our surrender. Jonathan Edwards warned that religion has always been corrupted when men mistake the heat of their own passions for the fire of divine love. That is the tragedy of shallow faith. It feels deeply, but it never dives deeply. Shallow faith cannot survive the silence of God because it was built on stimulation, not substance. It confuses goosebumps with grace. It lives from moment to moment, not from covenant to covenant. And when the emotional high fades, so does its devotion. But Edwards understood something we have forgotten. True spirituality is not loud. it is lasting. The heart that truly knows God doesn't panic when he is quiet. It presses in, because silence is not a sign of his absence. It is a summons into his depth. The distance we feel from God often exposes the distance we have chosen. We drift toward comfort and call it peace. We compromise and call it grace. We build entire theologies around our laziness, convincing ourselves that maturity means ease. But the Spirit will not dwell in a soul that is content with surface religion. He desires truth in the inward parts, Psalm 51 verse 6. And he will tear away everything false until only sincerity remains. When God feels distant, he is not punishing you. He is protecting you. He hides his face not to reject, but to refine. If he always gave you what you wanted, you would never learn to want what he gives. So he waits until you are desperate enough to seek him, not for comfort, but for himself. He withdraws from your emotions so he can draw near to your essence. It is not his presence that has changed, it is your perception. He is still there speaking, but the frequency of his voice can only be heard in stillness. That is why Jesus often withdrew to lonely places. He wasn't running from people, he was returning to the presence. Holiness thrives in hiddenness, and yet we have traded solitude for screens, stillness for stimulation, prayer for performance. We scroll through spiritual noise while ignoring the whisper of eternity. And when we no longer sense God, we assume he's gone. But how can you hear him when your soul is never silent? Edwards said, "The spiritual man lives not upon flashes of light, but upon the steady burning of truth within." That is what the Holy Spirit is after, not another experience, but endurance. He wants you to stop depending on the warmth of moments and start depending on the weight of his word. Because the word does not fluctuate with your feelings. It anchors you when your feelings fail. It keeps you deep when everything around you pulls you shallow. You cannot know the depths of God by visiting him occasionally. You must dwell there. You must stop approaching him like a guest and start abiding like a son. And sons do not leave when the house grows quiet. They stay because they know the silence of the Father is never empty. Every quiet season is God tuning your soul to hear the next revelation. He does not shout over chaos. He waits until you let it die. So maybe the distance you feel right now is not the sign of something wrong. It's the sign of something real. Maybe God is teaching you how to love him without needing to feel him. Maybe he is deepening your faith from emotional dependency to spiritual maturity. Maybe this silence is not a punishment but a promotion. The question is, will you wait long enough to let the silence shape you? Will you stay when the feeling fades? Because that's where real believers are born, where the emotions end and endurance begins. And if you choose to stay there, you'll discover something the shallow never will. The deeper you go, the louder his silence becomes. For in that quiet, the Spirit begins to whisper, not to your ears, but to your soul. Every true encounter with God begins not in knowledge, but in hunger. The shallow heart wants information. The deep heart wants transformation. And so God does not satisfy curiosity. He awakens desire. He does not fill the surface. He stirs the depths. Jonathan Edwards wrote, "The Spirit of God is not poured out on the curious, but on the contrite. He does not feed speculation, but sanctifies thirst. If you do not long for him, you will never find him, because the treasures of heaven are hidden where only hunger can reach." Desire is the language of the Spirit. When God seems silent, he is listening for that sound, the cry that proves you still care. He allows the distance so that your soul will remember what it's missing. He withdraws the feeling of his presence so that you will pursue the reality of his person. That is the mercy of divine delay. He refuses to give you shallow satisfaction. He will let you ache until you seek him for who he is, not what he gives. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 29. "But if from there you seek the Lord your God, you will find him if you seek him with all your heart and with all your soul." Notice the condition, not if you seek him when convenient, but with all your heart. That is the depth he demands. God does not reveal himself to casual seekers. He reserves his glory for the desperate. The shallow pray with their lips, the desperate pray with their life, and maybe that's why he feels far. Because you've learned how to talk about him without talking to him. You've learned how to raise your hands without lifting your heart. You've learned how to be inspired without being intimate. And the Spirit, holy, jealous, patient, waits for the moment when your hunger outweighs your habits. He's not looking for eloquent prayers, but for honest thirst. He's not impressed by performance, but by persistence. The only key that unlocks divine nearness is desperate desire. Edward said, "Where there is a spark of holy affection, there will be pursuit. For love will not rest till it possesses the beloved. That is the mark of the truly converted soul. It cannot stay still. It chases God into silence, into mystery, into surrender. It would rather wrestle with him in the dark than live comfortably without him in the light. That kind of faith doesn't drown in the deep. It's born there. If your prayers feel dry, it's not because God is gone. It's because he's deepening your thirst. If you feel hollow, it's because he's hollowing you out for more of himself. He will not let you be filled by noise, numbness, or nostalgia. He will not compete with the idols of convenience. He loves you enough to leave you unsatisfied until you find satisfaction in him alone. The reason your soul aches when you drift is because you were created for the depths of divine communion. The surface cannot sustain you. The shallow cannot satisfy you. Your heart was made to dive, to lose control, to surrender safety, to be immersed in his endlessness. You were not meant to sip grace. You were meant to drown in it. You were not made for spiritual routines. You were made for spiritual realities. And the Spirit's call still echoes, "Come deeper." The depths of God are not for the gifted, but for the yielded. Not for the learned, but for the longing. He doesn't call you to understand first. He calls you to desire. Because once your soul burns for him, the darkness of distance becomes the doorway to delight. The silence becomes sacred. The longing becomes love. And what once felt like abandonment becomes the furnace of intimacy. So if your soul is restless, don't despise the ache. It's holy. It means the Spirit hasn't given up on you. It means there's still something alive enough to hunger. And if you follow that hunger down far enough, you'll find that he was never hiding. He was waiting for you to want him this much. There comes a moment in every believer's life when the cry of the heart finally reaches the ear of heaven. It is not the loudness of your words that moves God. It is the depth of your surrender. Jonathan Edwards said, "The prayers that pierce heaven are born not from lips, but from broken spirits." When your hunger becomes desperation, when your silence becomes surrender, God responds, not from above, but from within, because he was never far away. He was waiting beneath the surface all along. This is what Psalm 42 verse 7 means when it says, "Deep calls to deep." It is not just you calling to him, it is him calling back. The Spirit who lives in you is calling to the Spirit who reigns above you. Your cry awakens the echo of eternity. When you descend in prayer, you do not enter an empty place. You meet the voice that has been calling you there. The deep places of God are not discovered. They are answered. And the answer is not a sound. It is his presence. When you finally stop running from silence, you realize that silence was never empty. It was occupied. God's quiet is not absence. It is atmosphere. He's still speaking, but now his words come as weight. You feel them more than you hear them. His nearness becomes a gravity pulling every false comfort out of orbit. His holiness becomes a pressure that presses your soul into surrender. It is in that still, sacred tension that real communion happens, not in flashes, not in noise, but in holy gravity. We often pray for God to come down, but in truth, he is calling us to come low. He descends to the humble heart, not to the busy mind. And the lower you go, the clearer he becomes. That's why Isaiah 57 verse 15 says, "I dwell in the high and holy place, and also with him who is of a contrite and lowly spirit. He is too high to be reached by pride, and too near to be noticed by noise. If you want to meet him, you must meet him where he loves to dwell, among the humble, the hidden, the hungry, and once you touch that presence, everything changes. It doesn't shout, it settles. It doesn't thrill, it transforms. The fire that once frightened you now becomes the warmth that fills you. The tears that once came from pain now flow from peace. The silence that once haunted you now becomes home. This is the mystery of divine nearness. The God who once felt far now becomes the breath between your thoughts. Edwards described it like this: when the Spirit enters the soul, it is as if the air of heaven begins to breathe through the heart of man. That is what happens when deep calls to deep. You start breathing his atmosphere. You begin to think his thoughts, love his truth, hate your sin, and long for more of him. The distance disappears not because he moved, but because you finally did. You have come down to where he dwells, and from that moment on, you will never again confuse silence with distance. Because once you've met him in the deep, you know he can never be lost, only left behind. You no longer measure his presence by emotion, but by endurance. You no longer chase his voice, you carry it. You no longer need constant signs. You live by the weight of his word. That's what the Spirit wants to form in you. Not fleeting visits, but permanent habitation. Not fire that fades, but flame that stays. Because God does not want to move upon you. He wants to move in you. He does not want you to visit his depths. He wants you to dwell there. And every time you return to prayer, every time you wait in silence, every time you surrender again, you're not starting over, you're sinking deeper. So stop asking, God, where are you? And start asking, God, how much deeper can I go? Because once you've tasted the depths, the surface will never satisfy you again. The deep calls, and the soul that answers never comes back the same. Every descent into God demands a death. The surface must die before the soul can live. That's why many never go deep, because the deep requires surrender, and surrender feels like drowning. Jonathan Edwards said, "The way to heaven is downward." Grace begins in the valley, not the mountaintop. You cannot meet God in his fullness while clinging to your comfort. The Spirit calls you lower, away from applause, away from self, away from safety, because that is where transformation begins. Depth is costly because it strips you. The shallows let you keep your illusions. The depths expose your reality. There, nothing artificial can breathe. Your reputation, your strength, your control, each one must die so that only what is eternal remains. That is why the Spirit feels dangerous. He kills what you thought you needed. He pulls you into a place where you cannot touch bottom, where faith becomes survival and trust becomes oxygen. In those waters, pride drowns, ego suffocates, and only dependence floats. Jesus understood this when he said in Luke chapter 9, verse 23, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily." The cross is not an accessory to faith, it is the entry point to depth. You cannot follow the crucified Christ without crucifying your comfort. Every genuine believer must one day confront this truth. The Spirit will not sanctify what you refuse to surrender. He will not coexist with your idols. He will love you too much to leave your life unbroken. But here is the mystery. What feels like loss is the beginning of life. What feels like drowning is deliverance. When God tears something from your hands, it is only because he plans to fill them with himself. He empties to occupy. He wounds to heal. He dismantles what is shallow so that what is real can finally breathe. Edwards wrote, "The more the heart dies to itself, the more room there is for the life of Christ to dwell within." So if you feel stripped, rejoice. He is making space. Depth will always cost you something that the surface allows you to keep. Your image, your convenience, your comfort with control. To go deep with God is to lose the illusion of independence forever. It is to admit that you cannot fix yourself, manage grace, or manipulate mercy. It is to be undone, and in that undoing, holiness begins. When you begin to live at that depth, your prayers change. You no longer ask God to make life easier. You ask him to make your soul stronger. You no longer seek to escape the fire, you seek to endure it, because you've learned that the flame doesn't destroy what's real. It only burns what never belonged. You begin to see every trial, every silence, every delay as part of his refining. You stop accusing him of distance and start thanking him for depth. The Apostle Paul said it like this: we always carry in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in us. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 10. That is the rhythm of the Spirit. Death and resurrection, descent and ascent, surrender and strength. Every time something dies in you, something eternal is born. The old confidence fades, but the new communion grows. The flesh weakens, but the fire deepens. And when the surface version of you finally dies, what rises from the depths is unrecognizable. It is not you improved. It is Christ alive in you. You speak differently, walk differently, love differently, because the deep has changed your nature. You no longer visit his presence. You live in it. You no longer talk about trust. You breathe it. And when people look at you, they no longer see the striving of religion. They see the stillness of redemption. So do not fear the deep. It will cost you everything, yes, but it will give you God. And when you finally lose yourself there, you will understand why the surface was never enough. Because the deep is not the place you drown. It's the place you discover you were never meant to breathe without him. The deeper you go with God, the more you realize the water burns. Beneath the waves, the Spirit keeps a furnace, holy fire wrapped in peace. It does not scorch to punish, but refines to purify. Jonathan Edwards said, "The Spirit of God is a consuming flame. Where he dwells, he consumes sin, that he may make room for himself. The same presence that comforts also confronts. The same hand that carries also cuts. The surface can soothe your emotions, but only the fire beneath the waves can cleanse your soul. That's why so many flee when they finally start to feel the heat. They thought depth was serenity, not sanctification. They came for peace but found pain, for blessing but met breaking. But this, my friend, is where holiness begins. Not where God spares you, but where he scorches everything false. He purifies not to destroy but to define. He exposes not to humiliate but to heal. Because what cannot endure the flame cannot enter his fellowship. Malachi chapter 3 verse 2 asks, "Who can endure the day of his coming? For he is like a refiner's fire and like fuller's soap." That is not poetic exaggeration, it is spiritual reality. When the Spirit enters a soul, he brings cleansing that cannot coexist with comfort. The impurities of pride, lust, hypocrisy, and fear rise to the surface. He burns away self-preservation until all that remains is surrender. And in that painful purging, you begin to see your sin not as weakness to hide, but as poison to forsake. The fire does not destroy you. It destroys your excuses. Edwards wrote, "God's mercy is not soft indulgence. It is a holy violence against all that keeps the soul from him." That's why sanctification feels like suffering, because the Spirit is fighting for your freedom. He will not allow you to stay enslaved to what he died to deliver you from. He loves you too fiercely to leave your idols unchallenged. And the deeper he works, the more you will feel the collision between heaven's purity and human resistance. But here's the mystery: the same fire that hurts also heals. The pain you feel is not proof of his absence. It's the pulse of his presence. He wounds only to remove infection. He convicts only to cleanse. He burns away the counterfeit peace that comes from pretending everything is fine. And though you may feel stripped and exposed, this is the truest mercy you will ever know. For only when the dross is gone does the gold reflect the face of the refiner. The Spirit's fire is not chaos, it is craftsmanship. Every flame is deliberate, every heat measured. He knows exactly what to burn and what to build. He will never waste a wound or misplace a moment of pain. He keeps you in the furnace just long enough to free you, not destroy you. And when he sees his reflection in your character, he knows the fire can rest. Peter described it like this: "Though now, for a little while, you have been grieved by various trials, The tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold, may result in praise and glory. 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. Every trial, every silence, every stripping is refining your faith into something indestructible. You begin to thank God not just for what He gives, but for what He takes away. Because what He removes is what was never real to begin with. And when the refining ends, the fire remains, but it no longer burns. It glows. You start to live with a steady warmth, not a flicker. Peace replaces panic. Purity replaces pretense. You move through the world unshaken because your foundation has been tested by flame. You no longer fear the fire because you have learned that it is not your enemy. It is your evidence. It proves you belong to Him, so when the Spirit's heat surrounds you, don't run, remain. Let Him burn until the lie is gone, the fear is gone, the mask is gone. Let Him make you holy until holiness no longer hurts. Because the fire beneath the waves is not sent to consume you, it's sent to reveal you. And when you rise from those depths, the world will see not the scars of what you endured, but the shine of the One who refined you there. When the fire finishes its work, what remains is not ruin, but rest. The storm that once raged inside becomes still. The noise of striving quiets, the hunger for applause fades, and what fills the silence is peace. Not the fragile calm of circumstance, but the deep stability of communion. Jonathan Edwards said, "The peace of the saint is not the absence of affliction, but the presence of divine order within." The fire brings that order. It consumes confusion and leaves clarity. It burns away the chaos of self and makes room for the calm of surrender. At the surface, peace depends on control. In the depths, peace depends on trust. You no longer need to predict, persuade, or perform. You rest in the sovereignty of the One who allowed the fire and commanded the sea. You realize that even the waves that tried to drown you were carrying you closer to Him. Every loss was a lesson, every wound a window. And now, as you stand purified and quiet before Him, you see what He was doing all along. He wasn't taking peace from you. He was teaching you how to possess it. Jesus said in John chapter 14, verse 27, "My peace I give to you, not as the world gives." The world's peace is borrowed. It can be stolen by a phone call, a diagnosis, a disappointment. But the peace of God is built on eternity. It doesn't break when circumstances do. That's why the saints who have gone deepest with God are the calmest in the storm. They no longer react to life. They respond to the Spirit. Their serenity is not naivete. It's victory. They have walked through the fire and discovered that nothing external can threaten what has been made eternal. This is the secret of stillness. When you lose the need to control, you gain the capacity to trust. And trust is not passive, it's powerful. It allows the Spirit to lead without resistance, to speak without interruption. You no longer demand explanations, you carry expectation. You no longer fear the unknown, you rest in the unchanging one. That is holiness in motion, peace anchored in presence, Edwards wrote. When grace reigns within, the soul becomes quiet not because it knows all, but because it knows enough. You don't need to understand every trial when you've already seen the goodness behind one of them. You don't need to hear His voice when you can feel His weight. You don't need to prove your faith when peace itself has become your testimony. People will look at you and wonder how you survived the fire, and you'll smile because you know you didn't survive it. You were remade in it. This stillness does not mean inactivity. It means your movement now flows from intimacy. You no longer work to earn favor. You work because you already have it. You no longer serve to be seen. You serve because you have seen Him. And the same God who burned you now builds through you. The same presence that purified you now produces fruit in you, patience, gentleness, strength, and joy that doesn't depend on outcomes. Paul called this the peace that surpasses understanding. Philippians chapter 4, verse 7. It's not ignorance, it's insight. You see reality differently now. You no longer divide life into good and bad seasons because you recognize every season as grace. Fire and stillness are no longer opposites, they are companions. For every time the Spirit refines you, He also restores you. Every scar becomes sacred space. Every loss becomes legacy. Every silence becomes song. And from that place of peace, the voice of God grows near again, not as thunder, but as whisper. Because He doesn't shout to the secure. He speaks softly to the surrendered. And when He whispers, you no longer question if it's Him, you know. Because your heart now beats in rhythm with His. The surface you left behind has become a mirror. It reflects not your face, but His. So rest, soul. The waves obeyed. The fire has finished. The silence has spoken. This is what the depths were always meant to produce. Not exhaustion, but equilibrium. Not distance, but dwelling. Not fear, but fellowship. For when purity has done its work, peace is what remains. Depth was never meant to be a moment. It was meant to become a lifestyle. The same Spirit who drew you into the fire now calls you to stay there. Not in the heat, but in the holiness. What began as a breaking must now become a rhythm. Jonathan Edwards said, "The measure of true devotion is not how high the flame burns, but how long it endures." God is not impressed by flashes of passion. He delights in the quiet fire that never goes out. This is where many falter. They visit the deep instead of living there. They confuse a season of surrender with a lifetime of sanctification. They remember revival, but neglect relationship. And slowly, they drift back toward the surface, to hurry, distraction, and noise, not realizing that the Spirit they long for still waits where they left Him. But the call of God has not changed. Abide. Don't just touch His presence, host it. Don't just feel the flame, feed it. Abiding means the habits of heaven begin to shape your days on earth. Prayer stops being a duty and becomes oxygen. Worship stops being an event and becomes environment. Obedience stops being negotiation and becomes nature. The deep becomes your dwelling, not because you are strong enough to stay there, but because you have learned to stay weak enough to depend. And that dependence is what keeps the fire alive. Jesus said in John chapter 15, verse 5, "Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me you can do nothing." Notice the word abide, not visit. Fruit doesn't grow in passing encounters. It grows in constant connection. The Spirit is not seasonal, He is steady. He doesn't seek weekend worshipers, but daily dwellers. He doesn't rest upon those who rise for a moment, but upon those who remain when no one's watching. The depth becomes devotion when consistency replaces intensity. Edwards wrote, "A saint's perseverance is not a mere effort of will, but the continual breathing of the divine within." That means staying close to God is not about striving harder, but staying surrendered longer. You cannot manufacture spiritual stability. You can only maintain yieldedness. When the soul stays low, grace keeps it steady. When humility becomes habit, holiness becomes reflex. You start to find joy not in novelty, but in nearness, not in the new, but in the known. And this is where true maturity begins. The highs and lows of faith even out into a steady glow. You stop needing emotional validation because peace has become your evidence. You stop chasing words because the Word Himself lives within you. You no longer panic when you don't feel God, because you've learned to walk with Him in quiet confidence. The proof of depth is not intensity, it's consistency. And the Spirit's greatest miracle is not visitation, it's habitation. This is the hidden life Edwards loved to describe, the believer whose devotion burns quietly behind closed doors. The one who prays without performing, serves without seeking recognition, loves without limit. Such a person doesn't make noise, they make history in heaven. They may seem ordinary to the world, but they carry an atmosphere that shifts every room they enter. Their peace preaches louder than their words. Their restraint testifies more than their zeal. Because when you live deep, even your silence has substance. So guard the depth the Spirit gave you. Don't let routine dilute revelation. Don't let comfort corrode conviction. Don't let noise replace nearness. Feed the fire in small ways, in stillness, in scripture, in secret worship. The world may never applaud such devotion, but heaven notices every breath of it. And over time, what once took effort will become instinct. Depth will no longer feel distant. It will feel like home, because the God who met you in the deep never meant for you to leave it. He meant for you to carry it into your mornings, your work, your relationships, your words, to live as one who has touched eternity and can never go back to the surface again. That is what it means to stay. That is what it means to abide. And that is the secret of a soul that never loses the flame. When the soul learns to stay in the deep, something extraordinary begins to happen. Your life starts to reflect the depth you dwell in. You no longer merely speak of God, you carry the atmosphere of His presence. The same way the sea shapes every stone it touches, His nearness shapes every part of you, your tone, your choices, your patience, your love. Jonathan Edwards said, "When God dwells in the heart, holiness ceases to be an act and becomes a nature. What once felt like obedience now feels like breathing. You have not become perfect. You have become permeated. The longer you abide, the more heaven begins to leave its fingerprints on your humanity. People may not know how to describe it, but they sense it. There's a weight around you that isn't heaviness. It's holiness. You enter a room and peace follows. You speak and conviction ripples through hearts. Not because you've learned to perform, but because you've learned to disappear. The less of you there is, the more visible He becomes." This is what Paul meant in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18. "We all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory." The deep changes you by reflection, not by effort. When you spend time in the light of His face, His image begins to print itself upon your soul. The transformation is not achieved. It is absorbed. You don't force yourself to look like Jesus. You stay long enough until you do, and when that reflection grows, the world begins to notice, not because you shine, but because you refract. Your life becomes a window through which others glimpse eternity. Your words begin to carry the fragrance of another world. You stop trying to convince people of God's reality. They start feeling it when they're near you. Edwards wrote, "The truly godly man preaches even when silent, for the presence of grace in him rebukes the world and awakens conscience." That's the ultimate evidence of depth, not eloquence, but embodiment. But reflection carries responsibility. The weight of glory is not decoration, it's calling. It presses on your soul with purpose. You realize that to reflect Him accurately, you must stay transparent. Any pride fogs the glass. Any compromise dims the light. That's why those who carry the most presence live with the most humility. They understand the mirror never becomes the image. It only bears it. And so the deeper you go, the lower you stay. Isaiah cried, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you." Isaiah chapter 60, verse 1. That is not a command to perform, it's a revelation to embody. The glory doesn't come to showcase you, it comes to reveal Him. The same Spirit that refines also reflects. He does not polish you for admiration, but for transmission, so that the beauty of Christ might break through the cracks of your redeemed humanity. The scars you once hid now shimmer with significance. Your weakness becomes His witness. Your story becomes a mirror for His mercy. And so the deep is no longer a place you visit, it's a person you carry. You begin to move through life as one who lives with borrowed light. Every act of kindness becomes worship. Every word seasoned with truth becomes ministry. Every moment of quiet obedience becomes reflection. People see your peace and feel His power. They see your humility and sense His holiness. And the more they see Him in you, the more your life ceases to be your own. That is what it means to bear the weight of glory. It is heavy because it is holy. It is costly because it is pure. It humbles because it reveals how small you are and how immense He is. And yet, it is joy, because the deeper you dwell, the more you realize that everything you lost in the fire was never life at all. The only real life is the one that reflects Him. So when the world looks at you, may they not see a religious man, but a reflection of redemption. May they feel the gravity of God when they hear your name. May your presence bring conviction and comfort in equal measure. Because this is what the deep produces, not fame, not feelings, but reflection. And reflection, when held long enough, turns into radiance. When all has been burned, when silence has spoken, when peace has settled, one call still echoes from the depths: remain. Because the deep is not a destination, it is a dwelling. Jonathan Edwards wrote, "Perseverance is the crown of grace, the continual motion of the soul toward God, even when it feels nothing but the weight of faith. To remain is to let the fire become endurance, the reflection become radiance, and the presence become permanence. You were never invited into a moment with God. You were invited into a life. And this life is not built on feelings or flashes of faith. It is built on the unchanging reality that God never left. The world will pull at you, trying to drag you back to the surface. Busyness will whisper that devotion is optional. Comfort will tell you that depth is for the desperate. But you know now that the surface is too thin to sustain a soul that has seen eternity. Once you've tasted the deep, shallow living will suffocate you. To remain is to protect that flame with everything you have. It's not dramatic, it's daily. It's choosing silence over noise, scripture over scrolling, surrender over speed. It's letting gratitude become your gravity and humility your home. You stop seeking highs in worship and start seeking holiness in ordinary moments. The kitchen table becomes an altar. The workplace becomes a sanctuary. The quiet commute becomes communion. Everywhere you go, the deep goes with you, because the deep now lives in you. This is what Paul meant when he said, "Christ in you, the hope of glory." Colossians chapter 1, verse 27. The goal was never to bring you into the presence. It was to make you its vessel. To turn your life into a flame that cannot be extinguished by time, distraction, or doubt. To make you a walking evidence that God still dwells among men. That is why the Spirit came, not to visit you occasionally, but to inhabit you eternally. Edwards described this life as a flame that feeds upon the infinite. It burns without burnout because its source is endless. That's why the saints who dwell deep do not fade. They endure. Their hearts stay warm even in winter. Their faith stands when others fall. Their words carry eternity because they have lived face to face with it. They are not loud, but they are luminous. And when they leave this world, the world feels the absence of their light. Remaining doesn't mean life will be easy. It means it will be anchored. You will still walk through storms, but now you know where the floor of faith lies. You will still face silence, but now you recognize it as sacred. You will still be refined, but now you rejoice because you trust the refiner. The deep does not exempt you from pain. It equips you to endure it. It makes you unshakable because your soul no longer rises and falls with circumstance. It rests in communion. And this is the final miracle. The God who once felt unreachable now lives closer than your breath. The fire that once terrified now comforts. The holiness that once humbled now holds you. The peace that once visited now abides. And as you walk through this world calm, steady, aflame, you carry an unseen kingdom wherever you go. Every act of love becomes a spark. Every word of truth becomes a torch. Every life you touch feels a little more of the heat of heaven. So remain. Don't let the deep become a memory. Let it become your motion. Live slow, live surrendered, live steady. And when your time on this earth ends, may your final breath sound like this truth: God never left. You just learned how to stay. Now, if this message reached you, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, your city and country, so the flame can spread. Share it with someone who feels far from God and remind them the distance they feel is not absence, it's invitation. Subscribe for more messages that confront comfort. Awaken holiness and call a generation back to the depths where God still waits. Because the deep has not disappeared, it's just waiting for someone